CHiPs, X-Files, Disney, ABC. Welcome to Truth on Tilt. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Truth on Tilt. I have a very special guest today. I got Paul Rabwin here with me today. He, wow, man, you take me back to my childhood. CHiPs, wow, first show, unbelievable. Whoever thought the California Highway Patrol would be so cool? You know, Frank Poncherello, all those people. And they actually had that spin-off cinematic movie, didn't they?
They did.
They did. Were you involved with that?
No, I did go on set to see them, but I was working. I did my 4 years on CHiPs, and I went off into the freelance world. I actually started in 1970. I started with a company called Quinn Martin Productions. This is even before CHiPs, where they did a couple of popular shows. They had one called The Streets of San Francisco, which was a big hit with Carl Malden. It was Michael Douglas's first TV show.
Yes.
It was kind of fun because I would watch Michael Douglas kind of learn to act from this great Oscar-winning actor, Carl Malden. So I spent about 8 years there with Quinn Martin. Then I went over to. I'm going back. I took you off of CHiPs, but it just got me thinking about what led up to CHiPs. I got a job over at Paramount, and I worked on what was going to be. This was an interesting story. There's going to be the reboot of Star Trek. And this was in the, I would say late 70s, probably 77, 78. Star Wars had just come out. And Paramount was looking to reboot Star Trek because they thought it would be ideal for it. And they couldn't get enough financing together to make it work. So I worked like a year on it. We never made the TV show that we were going to make. But what they did was they took the pilot that we had written. I didn't actually write it, but I was working on it. And they made Star Trek the motion picture out of that. So for about a week, I worked.
That was late 70s, right?
Late 70s. And for about a week, I worked on Star Trek the motion picture. And then they got rid of everybody who had a TV background, and I didn't get involved. But because I got laid off after that, I got a call from somebody saying, I have this show called CHiPs. You ever heard of it? I said, no, I hadn't. It had been on for a year, but I hadn't watched it. He said, I need someone to come in and run what they call post-production. So I ended up working on CHiPs. And about 2 years after that, I became the producer. It was great. I'm glad you saw it because
I'm aging myself when I saw it.
Obviously, I'm aging it a little more than that. But it was interesting because we had a point, we had a viewpoint, but we didn't draw our guns. It wasn't violent. It was about police officers. They were California Highway Patrol, but it was fun, and we would stunt cast, which means we put on famous people, most of whom were like old time actors that couldn't get a job, and we just helped them out and gave them jobs in this show. We did one show though that was really, I hope you saw it because it was one of the better ideas I had. I had met a young woman whose parents were deaf. She was not, but her parents were deaf. So she had learned sign language. She was very much involved in working with deaf children. And I met her at a function, and she started telling me a story. I said, gee, that would make a great episode of something. So we did an episode that started with a guy driving down the street, and he's driving erratically. And
they tell him to pull over. And
Highway Patrol pull over, and he rolls down his window. He's looking into the sun. So Larry Wilcox, who plays the other officer, we couldn't see his face. It was just a silhouette. All this guy can see is this black face, back behind, backlit by the sun. And Larry Wilcox starts telling him to get out of the car and see your driver's license. The guy can't read his lips. Larry doesn't know that he's deaf, and the guy can't speak very well. So he's mumbling, and he sounds drunk. And Larry opens the door and pulls him out and puts him up against the... Anyway, turns out it was all a big mistake. but it got us into having to find out what was going on, what happened in the world of the deaf that we don't know about. And we opened up this whole story. It was fascinating. And one of the things we did was Larry Wilcox kind of learns his lesson. Ponch kind of meets the daughter of this guy, and, they have a little fling going on, which is what happened in every episode. Ponch would meet some girl, and she taught him about what it's like to live with deaf parents. And they developed this whole, understanding. And we paid it off at the end of the show when the bad guys, in another storyline, end up in a very noisy environment in this industrial complex. And the guys have to find them, and they communicate with each other. It's so noisy. They had learned to communicate each other with sign language and non-verbal communication. And they learned their lesson from the deaf family, and we kind of paid it off as, oh, yeah, that's great. But that's the kind of thing. I'm glad you watched that show, because we tried to, I guess, not just so much to teach people, but to get you thinking about right and wrong and good and bad and all those things, not just a standard cop show. So looks like you learned from that. Good for you.
Well, as we were talking before, the first episode I truly remember was there was a guy who was basically an ass, and he hated small foreign cars. And I remember on an off-ramp, he would go park at the stoplight, wait till a small foreign car was like pulling up behind him, and then he would totally put in reverse and ram the crap out of him. And that was like 70, so I must have been 7 years old.
Yeah.
Scared the crap out of me every time we went on an off-ramp. So I think you did your job just right there.
Well, we did wreck a few cars there, too.
Yeah. Were there any stunts that went wrong?
Well, there were on occasion. We had one where we had an explosion, and our lead actor, not the guest actor.
Okay,
not
Frank Poncherello.
No, but one of the guest actors was, 100 feet away from the car when it exploded, and a piece of the fender went flying through the air and landed right on his arm. Did not damage his arm, but it set his wardrobe on fire, and we immediately came over and put it out. So he didn't really get burned, but it was crazy. Here's our actor on fire. He's not even near the explosion, but we were pretty safe. We did stunts and rolled cars, and we had the best stunt drivers, and we had the special effects people are the ones who would make the cars safe and put roll bars in it, and it was great. But we would do this every week. We'd wreck 2 or 3 cars. What was really interesting, shooting in Southern California, there weren't a lot of freeways that you could shoot on. It was, too many cars out there. But we needed to shoot on the freeway. It's about the Highway Patrol. So there were several cases where new freeways were being built. There was one out. It was the 118 freeway and the 210 freeway out in Sylmar. They hadn't been opened yet. For 2 years, they were building this freeway. So we rented from the city.
Sections.
Yeah, we rented sections. So there are times when you see just the same areas over and over and over again. Just kind of get used to it. One of my favorite moments, there was a freeway, the 118 freeway, which goes through the far end of the San Fernando Valley. It's all kind of open area out there. But that was the only freeway we could afford to shoot on. So we had one sequence where we had a guy tugging a boat, carrying a boat behind him, and the boat was sliding. Yes. So he turns off the freeway at what is called Tampa Avenue, which is right out in the middle of the San Fernando Valley. And he turns left off of Tampa Avenue and pulls into Marina del Rey, which is actually 40 miles away on the water. But that's the way we did it, the magic of editing. It was fun. We did have one accident though, which was actually pretty well known. It wasn't a stunt gone wrong. It was just a bad accident. Eric Estrada played Ponch, was on this Kawasaki 1000, which is a big monster of a machine, and he and Larry would ride the motorcycle. They would come into a shot, they would leave a shot, but all the stunt driving was done to their stuntmen. But this is one of the little things where he was going probably 5 miles an hour and pulls into the shot, and he accidentally hit the gas instead of the brake, and this big motorcycle just reared up and rolled back over on top of him. We had to airlift him to a hospital. He was out for months. During that time, he had replaced. We brought in Bruce Jenner.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
So, but that was one of the things that went wrong. But he was a trooper, and he came back. I liked him. Eric had a bad rap, but he was a very, very nice guy.
Were there any surprises you got from being on a hit cop show, like getting involved? Any surprises once you got on set?
Sure, I wasn't. I did, like I say, when I first took the job, I didn't know what it was about, and it was on Saturday nights. Who watches television on Saturday nights? But it really developed an audience. So, like I say, I was 2 years. Most of my career spent in an area called post-production, which I still love. Post-production was sound, music, color, visual effects, all the great visual effects that we see now. As I can imagine what it was like back in those days. It was it was really, really where I think the most creative part of filmmaking takes place in post-production. So that was my background. I was made a producer after 2 years on the show, so I got to work with the writers and work with the directors and editors and be on set a little more than normal. I think I was surprised at, once I got in that position, of how many talented people it takes to make a television show. And this was also this is the late 70s, early 80s. You can imagine it's much different now, many years after that. But there were a lot of really, really talented people, and I had never really been involved. I was in post-production, so I was working in editing rooms, and I was working on what we call the mixing stage or dubbing stage. There were certain areas where I was, and I had my little group. When I was made a producer and got on set, working with the writers, working closer with the actors, working with the camera department, the grips, the wardrobe people. Everybody has a job to do, and they're really, really good. And I was really surprised to find out how efficient and how talented some of those Hollywood crews are.
So let's fast forward to 1993.
Yeah, 1993 though.
Now this is a big part of your resume because this was another hit.
Oh yeah.
Where did we go? We went to the X-Files, correct?
That's right.
How did you get involved with the X-Files?
So it's interesting how things take place. When I got CHiPs, for example, I'd gone there through a recommendation. The producer needed somebody, called a friend of his who used to work at Quinn Martin, where I had been. He says, "Yeah, Paul Rabwin would be a good guy for you to have." And I went over and met him and got that job. The X-Files was very different. I'd done 3 shows with an executive producer named Bob Goodwin. I met him when I first started my career, and I'd done several series and pilots with him. So we had kind of a bond. So I wasn't working at the time. I had been doing a show. I got a show with a pilot called Mantis, which was like a Batman with an African-American actor, and it actually went for a year. I did the pilot. The pilot was not quite finished, and I was told, I was working at Universal at the time, and they called me and said, "We want to redo this pilot. There's some things that we aren't happy with. We're going to shut down for 8 weeks and come back. So you're laid off for 8 weeks." I said, "Great. I'm now out of job for 8 weeks. I could, I guess it's not terrible, but, who knows?" That happened on Friday. Now, the following Wednesday, I got a phone call from my old friend, Bob Goodwin. He said, "What are you doing?" Now, if this call had come 1 week earlier on a Wednesday, I would have said, "I'm working on this show. I'm not available." And it was a good show. Sam Raimi was the executive producer of the prestigious show. I said, I can't do it. I'm not available. But it came the following Wednesday after I'd been laid off on Friday. I said, "Well, as a matter of fact, I just got laid off on something. Why? What have you got?" He says, "I have this new show. I think it's going to be something incredible. I want you to do it." I said, "Okay, I guess that'd be better than 8 weeks off. So just by luck and the right connection, I got asked to be the co-producer of The X-Files. Since it was new, no one knew anything about it. I read the first script. I said, "This thing is great. This is really something." When that show came on the air, I talk about being surprised. If the first show was about aircraft functioning in a way that could only be done if you worked, had alien, metal or something recovered
Correct.
from Area 51. Thought that was kind of crazy. Some guy I know worked for Martin Marietta, a big aerospace company. Came to me and said, "Boy, I saw that show. You guys, I don't know if you know this, but you're onto something." I said, "Really?" I said, "That's interesting." I thought that was okay. But the second episode, the show called Squeeze, it was about a guy who sleeps for 30 years, wakes up, kills 5 people, eats their livers, goes back to sleep again, and he can slip underneath doors and through keyholes and up chimneys. Okay, pretty far out kind of a show.
Pretty sci-fi.
Pretty sci-fi. The day after that show aired, 2 people came up to me and said, "God, that is such a cool show. Are these based on real stories?" And I said, "Oh my God, we've got a hit. If they're buying that, this is amazing." That show just kind of tapped into something. There have been others since then, and there are others before. The Twilight Zone was great. There's Fringe. All there's other shows, but the X-Files had just with the right show at the right time. And what I think made it great wasn't that it was a science fiction show. We always said, this is a procedural. This is a cop show. This is about 2 FBI agents who happen to have great respect for each other. Their beat is the paranormal. And that's what takes it into another level. But really, it was about that relationship. And it always was about that relationship. And people now, when you say Mulder and Scully, that was one of the most important TV relationships in their lives, And it was great. And it held up pretty well, even during the last couple of years when it wasn't so great. There were still some terrific shows. Vince Gilligan, who went on to create Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, he wrote a bunch of those great episodes. And Howard Gordon, who did Homeland and 24. We had a terrific group of writers on that show. It was amazing.
Well, X-Files had a cult-like following. It really did. And I feel a lot of the sci-fis usually do. Star Trek, Star Wars, and X-Files, right? Was there anything going on behind the curtain that the cult following didn't really know what was going on?
Well, David and Jillian got along very well. I think I don't know that they were particularly friendly to each other outside of work, but they had this great chemistry when they were on camera. I think that there was a really strong sense of everyone on this show taking it personally, really wanting this to be the best show we possibly could. And we went to a lot of lengths for that. I mean, there was a tremendous amount of research. I would travel up to Vancouver periodically, and I would either shoot up there or go deal with some of our vendors. And I think what went on behind it wasn't anything like that. I think was detrimental to it. I think there was a really, really strong sense of pride and ownership of the show. The city of Vancouver, where we shot for 5 years, really adopted us. Some of the locations that we shot at were around the city. We could make Vancouver look like almost any place in the country. It was really spectacular. We had people come out of the woodwork. Wherever we went, people were really gathering around us. They loved us up there, and I loved being up there. It was terrific.
Vancouver's beautiful.
Vancouver's beautiful.
Beautiful.
And what was great is one of the things that helped that show for the first 5 seasons is shooting out rainy rainforest where it's kind of
muddy.
Muddy. It had this whole feel about it that was just so unique. When we moved after season 5, we moved down to Los Angeles. It's very interesting. The very first episode for season 6, which was the first season that we shot in Los Angeles in Southern California, the very first shot was the camera looking up at a blazing sun. And camera tilts down to what was supposedly like a prehistoric scene, and we see an old caveman running through the desert. And basically, that was Chris Carter saying, "We're not in Vancouver anymore. We're in another part of the world now."
Right. So when you said L.A., were you in L.A. on a set, or did you go out to like Palm Springs?
Well, for
the desert type.
Right. We would go out into Yucca Valley or near Palm Springs to shoot some of those desert scenes. We would shoot all over Southern California. We were based at 20th Century Fox Studios, which is right in Century City, the heart of L.A., and we were on the stage. So the stage was set up with all the FBI offices and all sorts of things were on the stage. But we would just go around town. L.A. is there's a lot of different environments where you can find, and a lot of houses and we did. We would shoot in a house somewhere, and then people would start making pilgrimages to go to that house. And that's the house that was shot on the X-Files. Things like that. It is interesting when you walk through when you drive through L.A. You can see little signs set up telling you where the location is. Well, they're all over town because people, there's tons of filming going on in L.A. We had to be very careful never to use the X-Files logo on any of ours because people would just show up, and so
Right.
we always had a cryptic pseudonym for the names of the shows whenever we were shooting, where we had these little signs telling people where to go.
Did you ever put any hidden gems or hidden nods in any of the episodes that only the diehard fans could find?
Oh, there were little Easter eggs all the time. There was one there was one where Chris Carter did one where we were the camera was going through a cemetery, and he had names of former girlfriends on the tombstones there. What was really kind of funny is we had because we were shooting in Vancouver, there are some things that I would have to go in and change signs where the Canadian/British way of spelling things, like the word labor, L-A-B-O-R in the U.S., it's L-A-B-O-U-R in Canada. And there were times when we would have to, go in and change the name on a sign. So there were times when things kind of got through that weren't supposed to, but it was fun. We'd have little Easter eggs sometimes referring back to other characters, or it was the names sometimes would be reflective of some of the people on the show would have their name used in as one of the characters. It was kind of homage to them. It was fun,
Being post-production guy, do you ever see something come out and you realize you missed it and you're like, oh shit, or you just do you just go with it?
Oh no, we've had those moments where something stayed in that wasn't supposed to, something that was supposed to go in that wasn't. We talk about all these great visual effects to fix things. One of the things that I did when I was running post-production, even as a producer and even as a supervising producer, I still was in charge of the post-production of the show. And when I said before that we really personalized and took this, it became part of us. When we delivered a show, which means the show is now final, it's ready to go, I'm going to send it over to Fox and they're going to put it on the air. That last night, I would get home at 6 or 7 in the morning every week. And people say to me, but you're a producer. Why do you have to stay that late? I said, because my name's on the door. If something goes wrong, Chris Carter, the executive producer, is going to pick up the phone. Who's he going to call? He's going to call me. How did that happen? And I don't want to say, well, I wasn't there. I have to either take the responsibility for it or fix it. And I can't tell you how many times, 2, 3, 4 in the morning, I would see something, and we would just say, okay, how can we fix this? We don't have visual effects. We don't. I was on a listening to the sound on something, and there was supposed to be a siren when when a police car comes in. For some reason, it dropped out. It disappeared when we made our final transfer, and here's this cop car coming in with red lights going and no sound. So we had to figure something out, and we came up with some, jury-rigged fix, like using, gum and straw to fix these things. And this was a big show. Probably the biggest stuff missing was we had a show. It's called Tunguska, and in it Mulder was strapped down in a Russian prison camp, and we had this special black oil that was caused by worms, and we had worms crawling up Mulder's skin and going up through his shoulder onto his face. We see these worms going through his face, and they go into his eye and turn into black oil. This was one of the themes. People who watched the show would probably remember that theme of the black oil. We had a visual effects company. It was pretty good. But for some reason, they had trouble with this particular episode. So we had to deliver the show on a certain day. So 2 days before we deliver the show, I needed to get all of my final visual effects. This guy showed up, and we started running the effects. And first one wasn't very good. I said, boy, we're going to have to redo that. The second one that he showed me, there was a tracking problem where there was the worm on the guy's hand, and he moved his hand, and the worm floated in the air. It never tracked. Just little simple stuff that should have been fixed. And then we got to the big effect, which was the worm crawling up Mulder's face and going into his eye and turning into a pool of oil. And I said, okay, let's take a look at that one. He says, we ran out of time. I couldn't do it. I said, in what world did a professional visual effects company just say I couldn't do it? So here I had 2 days to get this show completed, to put it on the air. I called up 5 different visual effects companies, and I had my assistant and our visual effects supervisor and 3 other people, our post-production coordinator, and we all went in different areas, and we each took an effect, and we all worked on it independently. I was up for 72 hours. We would all meet at one location the next morning with Chris Carter coming in, and we'd go and figure out which ones were okay and which ones weren't. And we had a screening that takes place on the East Coast, and a screen takes place on the West Coast. Because we were on, let's say we were a 9 o'clock show, so it would be 9 o'clock on the East Coast at 6 o'clock here. So that meant we still had another few hours to
fix
work
problems.
So we literally had the East Coast feed had everything except one effect in it, and then the West Coast feed had a final version of it. That's the closest I ever came to missing an air date and not getting everything in. But it was amazing that we got it done.
So being a producer, from the way you're saying it, is almost like being an entrepreneur, right? The owner of it. And the buck stops with you, right? So yeah. That's why you kind of have to be able to dabble in all the different pieces, and everything that the final product has to be perfect because your brand, your name is on it. How did you because you also had a young family at the time as well. How did you balance work-life balance and being a producer at the same time?
Oh, that was very difficult. You can ask my wife, and she'll tell you not very well sometimes. No, you do have to come up with boundaries, and you do have to understand what that balance can be. It's difficult because the phrase I always kind of used is, when you're in that business, you've got 2 marriages, and it's very difficult. And one or the other is going to feel left out at all times. It's tough. So we, after I'd gotten really settled in, after 6-7 years with this show, and I started to feel comfortable with it, I did really radical things. I left my phone in the car at night, as opposed to bringing the house. When I first started, we were using pagers and not phones.
The beeper.
And I would be driving, and I would get a beep, and I'd have to pull over and find a pay phone. And it was so primitive. It was crazy stuff.
First world problems, Paul.
And you start, but you start discovering that, you're being pulled in a lot of different directions.
Right.
And there were times when my wife needed me, or I wanted to be at a soccer game or something, and something came up at work, and I had to take care of it. And it is difficult. And you're right. Sometimes the higher up the ladder you get, the more responsibility you have, and you feel that responsibility. It was not easy, but this show was such a magnificent project to work on that my wife kind of understood how important it was, and also we also understood how groundbreaking the show was. We weren't working on some little sitcom. This was a very special show, and you're right, it did achieve cult status. In fact, I think we were the first when AOL started. AOL started up while we were on the air. We were one of the first entertainment chat rooms. Was for the X-Files. I was there. I would be in my office with my little Apple IIc.
Yeah, the AOL dial-up. You get connected, and you only be connected as long as no one picked up the phone on the other end.
That's correct.
Oh, I remember those days. This generation, these younger generations have no idea how rough we had it, right? I mean, the whole concept of pulling over to find a payphone because your beeper went off.
Yeah.
Could you imagine nowadays? I mean, they're already mad enough that you were texting them normally, not using Snapchat, right?
Yeah. Well, I go back even before that when I was had to use a typewriter for everything. We didn't have a computer, I used a typewriter, and it was crazy how technology. Once technology gets going, it's exponentially fast and rapid. I know there's a term for it. There's some term that says, how things get, improved much faster every year. Like right now, the visual effects
every 6 months.
The visual effects, that's right. The visual effects that you see on a television show now. Let's say Lord of the Rings television show, or even White Lotus, or any of these shows. Obviously, the Marvel shows on the Disney channels. The visual effects that you see in a big Hollywood movie from 5 years ago wouldn't even qualify to get an Emmy on television this year. We have put out on these TV shows now feature quality visual effects at a fraction of the cost. It's amazing, but the sophistication level of the viewership just keeps going up and up and up, and the requirements, demands are so great. So we want to see feature quality visual effects. So that whole department now, I was working with AI 3 years ago before anyone knew what that was. Now it's of course a household word. But I have no idea the state of what visual effects are going to be in 2 years from now. It's going to be what we're doing right now is going to be primitive. It's amazing.
It was easy to get away with poor visual effects back in the day that the TV weighed 1,000 pounds and it came with a wet bar and a record player.
Right.
But now, I mean, the TVs are, the definition of the TVs you can get, and they even have the 8K TVs out now. Of course, they're selling for what plasmas were selling for when they first came out. I mean, it's almost required, right? Or else you're going to lose. No one's going to watch the show if the effects are not where they should be. I mean, even you look at any of the shows that just take a place in what they would call the cowboys, where they live out in nowhere, Texas or New Mexico or Wyoming. People want those crisp aerial shots that just make them wish that they were there.
Yeah, yeah, and we, and you think about the early days of the X-Files, 93, 94. We were making it up as we went along. I mean, I would do stuff in with a colorist where we had one show about a vampire who gets exposed to the sun, and we wanted his face to start turning red. So we literally went into what's called a color bay with a colorist, and we would just move the dial. We would just set it up and start moving the dial and bringing in more and more red, and just doing stuff very primitive. But the sophistication level of the viewership was quite a bit different then. But we did some pretty fun stuff. I got to admit, it was pretty cool.
If you could sum up in 3 words what a 12-hour shoot was like, what would you say?
3 words for a 12-hour shoot: creative, exhausting, and fun. Really.
Was there any favorite snacks that you wanted to have around, or were you not that diva?
I was, there's the area on the set that everyone appreciates is called craft services, and that's where they put out the snacks. When we worked late, if we were shooting at 20th Century Fox Studios in Century City, there was a taco stand not too far from there called Tito's Tacos on the west side of Los Angeles. And if we were going to shoot late, our craft service people would give them a call, and they would go to this taco stand. They'd bring in 150 tacos at 11 o'clock at night to keep us going. Yeah, it was. It may sound indulgent, but it's important to keep that many people happy and excited and alert. Sometimes you just need to have food for them and soft drinks and coffee and whatever.
So how many seasons was X-Files?
So X-Files, the original, went for 9 seasons, and I worked on all 9 of those seasons. I worked on every single episode from the pilot through the very end. I then went off and I was working in some other freelance jobs, and I ended up being an executive over at the Walt Disney Company. They went back later and shot season 10 and season 11. I wasn't involved in them. I kind of glad I wasn't involved because it's really hard to recapture the magic. There were a few good episodes. I don't think anyone thinks they were held up to the standard of the first seasons. Yeah, but it was as you said before, it's a great resume item, but also it's people in any industry, it doesn't matter what it is, what business you're in, you want to have that moment where you have kind of a brass ring, where you can say, I did it, I did this, I did that, I invented that, whatever. So for me, I finally retired after 53 years in the business. That's a long time to be in the business. And one of the reasons I have no regrets is because I got the brass ring. I worked on one of the most influential, exciting, and quite frankly, fun shows ever. And if you can get up in the morning and go to work and say, I would say the same thing every morning. Who gets to do this? How lucky was I? And it was great,
So it wasn't a job; it was a career.
It was it was a career, and it was just an existence. It was this fabulous world that I was a part of. It was great.
Now I can remember along the way there was a time where Entertainment Tonight, that show, was saying that were they trying to shut down the show after the first few seasons? Was there a time where there was something going on set and they wanted to shut it down?
Well, I'm not sure if they wanted to shut it down. I know that it certainly had, it didn't appeal to everybody. In fact, in season 4, there was a show called Home, which has become the sort of the poster child of what the X-Files really was. It was so bizarre and so horrifying that the network said, we'll never put this on the air again. And it singularly became the most popular show in the history of the episodes, about the Peacock brothers who were, it was they had genetic difficulties, and there's an all incestuous relationship with the mother, and she had no arms, no legs, and they kept her under the bed. I mean, it was so bizarre that no one can believe that that show actually was written, much less shot and produced. And when the network saw it, they said, "We're never gonna rerun this show." Well, it became insanely popular, and now called Home. People love that. I don't know that they were going to shut it down. I think it was just growing pains. But they moved it from Friday nights to Sunday nights after 2 years, and that's when the show really took off. It became a big hit.
Yeah, I can't think of I can't think of a show. Well, Shark Tank now is probably what I watch on a Friday night.
Yeah.
Usually my Friday nights are trying to catch up on all the shows that I haven't been able to watch. That, and then Sunday night you were on Fox. Was NFL on Fox yet at that time?
But I think they were. I know we got preempted once in a while. We kind of knew when it was, but we were, we had our time slot. We were at 9 o'clock on Sundays, and that's when we aired. May I'm not sure. Maybe they didn't have the Sunday night football at that time, but because we were pretty solid. We were pretty solid 9 o'clock on Sundays. It was exciting to always see what was going to be next. Whenever I got a script, I didn't know if it was going to be a comedy, like Humbug or Jose Chung from Outer Space, or some of those really, really incredible shows, or an alien horror show, or one of the mythology shows. That's what was so great about this, is that it really was different. Every week when you tuned in, you weren't sure what you were going to get, but you knew it was going to be something cool.
So you already alluded to it. Then you became an executive at ABC Walt Disney.
Yeah.
That is a corporation that if you go through any business school, you definitely read about Walt Disney at some point, right?
Yeah.
And it's so funny because they're like, oh, Walt Disney, he was, I always joke around, he was the guy that bought that swampland, right?
Yeah, right.
down in Kissimmee.
Yeah.
Hey, I got some swampland you buy. He's like, sure, he drained the swamp, truly. This guy drained the swamp. And, it's so funny being a South Florida kid. Everyone's like, oh, Florida's so humid. I went to Disney once. I'm like, you do realize that it is the middle of the Everglades.
Right.
That's why it's so hot and humid. And also, going to Disney World, coming out to Disneyland, just the dynamics, like how small Disneyland is compared to Disney World. It was very shocking for me that Cinderella's castle is like right at the entrance, where in Disney World you got to walk a marathon to get to Cinderella's castle. It's a wonderful corporation, but I'm sure there are a lot of things at that corporation that kind of drove you nuts.
Well,
are there a couple of policies you would want to change almost immediately?
Well, that's an interesting question. We went through a little bit of an upheaval before I retired. The CEO, Bob Iger, had stepped down, and a new CEO had taken over, and he lasted a couple of years. It was not a happy time. There were some changes that were made. The bottom line became more important than the creativity. People weren't valued, I don't think, as much as they should have been. The morale took a nosedive during those last years, and I was there. And finally, they had enough, and Bob Iger was reinstated as the new CEO. But
what year was that?
This would have been, I think, 21, 22. It's right after COVID.
Okay.
And it was COVID took a big toll on the whole industry. It was a real challenge. And then,
especially out here in California.
And then not long after that, we had these strikes. And I didn't leave because of the strikes, but I left right after they finished. It kind of felt like it was the right time for me to go. I'd put in my time at Disney. There's a certain point when, I know this sounds a little crass, but there's a certain point after you've been there a certain amount of time, you get to keep your pass to Disneyland, the
Right.
parks, and you get discount on cruises and, there's benefits. So I said, maybe it's time. I've been in the business 53 years. I was my late 70s. And we're working into our 80s these days. But I said, maybe it's time for me to spend some time at home. So it worked out fine because we never really came back from the strikes the way we thought we were going to. So it was a nice time for me to leave. I'm sure they were happy to get me and my salary out of there anyway. So it was fine. But the interesting thing is here we are, we're in 2025, we're in May. The word DEI has become a dirty word in politics. The last 2 years that I was at Disney, we spent an enormous amount of time developing our DEI programs. We were very proud of it. I did research papers on it. It was treated, DEI was treated as a point of pride and accomplishment. And I just have to say, I'm not going to make many political statements, but for me to see the way the current environment has viewed it and has denigrated it shows a total lack of understanding. What we did was we created opportunities. We didn't create jobs. We didn't give jobs to people. We didn't give jobs to people over someone else. We created opportunities for people who might not have those opportunities. The difference between saying, okay, you're going to get a job and we're going to read your resume, or we're not going to not read your resume because your name looks funny. We opened up the world to a lot of very, very talented people who got their jobs on their merits, but these were opportunities they might not normally have. And we did that very well.
Do you know Dr. Cheryl Ingram by chance?
I do know that name, yeah.
Okay, so Dr. Cheryl Ingram is in my doctoral program.
Mm-hmm.
She's getting her second doctorate. She's all about DEI in Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
And she actually does a podcast out of here.
Really?
And the problem with DEI is that soon as you say DEI, it's politicized.
Yeah.
Right? The same thing could be said about global warming. Yes, as humans, we are screwing up the earth. But if you say global warming, again, that word is politicized.
Right.
But if you ask anyone, hey, is there a heap of trash the size of almost a continent in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, very few will say no. Well, obviously we're ruining it. Do you think DEI came to be from all the online criticism that Disney was receiving? Or do you think you were at the forefront thinking we should do this? Because and the reason why I asked that question, there's a lot of organizations that say we're green, we're going green. But they're maybe changing out their light bulbs to LED bulbs, and that type of thing. But that's making them go green. Mm-hmm. So do you think you're saying Disney was at the forefront of DEI, or do you think it was in response to the political climate and what was going on, especially during COVID?
Disney walked the walk. They really did. I was very proud of my whole time there when they were extremely responsible. They're very, very the HR department, I thought, was just top notch. They took care of their people. Were they at the forefront? They may have been at the forefront. They certainly, though, were absolutely rock solid in their goals, and they encouraged all of the employees to achieve these goals. And I found it to be an extremely admirable company. It's a big corporation. There's always going to be things in big corporations, very fashionable to say, well, they're a big corporation. They can't really, relate to the people. But the brand of the Walt Disney Company is among probably the top two brands in the world, Coca-Cola and Walt Disney. Those are the ones everyone knows them in every corner of the earth. They have to protect that brand. And I think they do a pretty good job of it. I felt as an employee working there, I thought they really did. The DEI was, when it's handled right, is good. It's good for people. It's good for, to like I say, to provide opportunities to those who may not get them. I think that's important. I think this, the melting pot of this country is we're not taking advantage of the talent that is out there because of the biases that we carry with us. I mean, we all carry them. It's unfortunate, but that's the way it is. I mean, we're seeing it more and more now. I mean, the political spectrum really kind of has made it pretty front and center.
Well, because the political spectrum, that so-called leaders of this country on both sides have divided this country so horribly.
Absolutely.
Where a great majority of us live right down the middle, right? We're very fiscally conservative, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't believe in frivolous spending. But socially, we don't believe that we know what's best for everybody. But somehow or another, these people who got degrees in law and political science believe that they know what's best for all of us without even listening to any of us as their constituents. I am wholeheartedly behind you. I believe the more diversity you have in your group, the greater your think tank is. And a lot of people who I believe are ignorant on that part really think it is about stealing jobs from white people. So they really don't know what it's about. They don't go research it. They just, because it's politicized, they're like, the Republicans said DEI is wrong, so it's wrong. Or, hey, you're racist because you don't believe in DEI. How do you even have a conversation to that? It's impossible. It's impossible to do. But I'm glad you've gone down this rabbit hole, because I have a very strong question for you, because I worked with a bunch of Hispanics who were diehard Disney fans. And they were so freaking pissed when Disney changed The Little Mermaid. How would you respond to people like that?
When they changed The Little Mermaid, well, Disney's taken a lot of flack for a number of things. I mean, talk about recently, what about Snow White? I mean, they just did a remake of Snow White, and this is where DEI can backfire a little bit, because when they made this, it was, several years ago when they have a Hispanic Snow White. And a lot of people are very, very upset, saying you've got to stick with what with reality. We didn't get. It's sort of a mixed bag, because Princess Tiana is an African American princess from Prince and the Frog. They've just redone the famous Splash Mountain ride to be Tiana's Bayou Adventure, I guess, and I don't know that we have to change things, to cater to one racial prejudice or another. But I think we have to recognize them, and I think we have to not denigrate them. It's like there have been a lot of discussion, just not outside of Disney, of using Native American or Indian names for logos, and the football teams have changed their names because of it. And is that right or wrong?
Except for the Florida State Seminoles.
Except for the Seminoles,
because the Seminole Indians,
the real tribe.
But they get money. They get 25% of sales.
Well, there you go. Then
then
don't change it.
Exactly. Right? They're like, go for it.
Don't change it. But it's like
just don't serve Bud Light. No, just kidding.
But there are some things like there was the resort in California called Squaw Valley. Well, right. Squaw's not considered a nice term, so maybe it's good to change that. As far as as far as Little Mermaid's concerned, I don't know. I mean, look, people are going to get upset at almost anything you do, and that's kind of where we are right now. So you just kind of pays your money and takes your chances. It's like, this is what I feel is going to be right, and you go for it, and you're not going to please everybody. So it's like I kind of expect that there's going to be, backlash for almost any decisions we make.
Right, but I mean, the argument they were saying is that the Little Mermaid's Norwegian. Now it's taking place in the Caribbean. It's like they changing the whole story, the whole narrative that I love. And I mean, and these are diehard, like there's diehard X-Files fans. These are diehard Disney fans, like season passes, everything they wear is Disney. They have Mickey Mouse ears on everything. I mean,
yeah,
I guess my question is where's the line between doing the right thing and causing creative censorship?
Well, that's always going to be that line is always going to be there. I mean, there's no way to tell when you've crossed it. I think I don't like any kind of censorship. So creative censorship. No, I'm not. I don't think we should say anything is right or wrong. Say you like it or you don't like it. It pleases me. It doesn't please me. I think it's right. You think it's wrong. It's going to be that way. And I don't think there's anything wrong with creatively placing a story in a different environment. Like we've been doing that with Shakespeare all along. We've been taking, plays have been set in different, different arenas. Hey, on Broadway, there's a big Broadway show just opened about Betty Boop, played by an African American actress. Now, is someone going to say, well, I watched Betty Boop when, she was a cartoon. Well, not too many people still remember the original Betty Boop because it's pretty damn old. But sometimes you can do that. You can be creative. We've had African-American actors playing white roles. You can see them playing Hamlet. I don't see people saying, well, you can't have Denzel Washington play Hamlet because Hamlet was Danish. Yes. That's true. But you can have Denzel Washington play Hamlet, and you can have The Little Mermaid be in another environment. And either you like it or you don't like it. But don't censor it.
Well, because I can see that, it's kind of died down, but the whole cancel culture can get rid of originality from these creative artists that are just incredible. And, we saw it a lot. You see it a lot with the comics, like the fact that comics now end their bits apologizing to everyone they might have offended, and it's just like you go to a comedy show to laugh. You don't take it seriously. So, I just think, like, will it take the originality away from all these people that write shows, write movies, write plays, make music? Do we have to worry about that?
Yeah, look, you talk about comedy. Yes, comedy is very there are certain comedians, certain shows, certain attitudes that I don't agree with. I mean, I got to tell you, I am not a huge Howard Stern fan. Howard Stern is one of the most popular personalities in the world. He's not my taste. I don't say Howard Stern shouldn't be on the air, or I don't say Howard Stern's not good, or his comedy is not good, and the way he interviews people is a little too rough for me, too sexual, too whatever. That's not the point. That's not my attitude. My attitude is, you know what? I don't like him that much. There are a lot of a lot of things that I agree with, and a lot of things I don't agree with. And I'm not going to say one shouldn't be on the air or one should be on the air. Let's look at news broadcasts right now. I would never say, okay, I'm only going to watch CNN. I'm never going to watch Fox News. I watch them both. And I watch MSNBC, and sometimes I watch PBS. And
It's
sometimes I
because the
watch it
truth is somewhere in the middle.
You want to, you want to hear what everybody is saying and what are they saying, and then you have to say, okay, I see the point. It's just a question of what is the message that you're sending out, and I think you can control the message and spin it one way or the other. And I think that's what we've gotten ourselves in the middle of now. I think we're in the middle of a spin war, really. I mean, the evidence and the facts are not going to change. It's just a question of how they're being viewed and how they're being spun, really. That's what it comes down to.
Right. And what also concerns me, because we at Pacific Lens, we have a social justice podcast, and I'm lucky enough to host it with two very well-educated African-American men. And, they even say, like, if we forget about a lot of this history by wiping it out because of the racist or slavery or whatever tie you say, if we start getting rid of parts of that history, we're deemed to repeat it. Like, I'm concerned about they're not teaching the Holocaust enough anymore.
Right. I mean, when you see about certain historical articles being taken off government websites right now, it's just pathetic. And there was I guess it was an anti-DEI edict, and they probably went through AI and said, here are the words that if they exist, you have to take them out of there. And as a result of that, on the Department of Defense website, a historical article about the first female general in the Army was wiped out because DEI verbiage seemed to be there. One of the most interesting ones is, I don't know if you heard this, but the plane that dropped the atomic bomb is a very famous plane. It's a very famous name. This is the plane that dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. It is in every history book and is very well known to anyone who studied history. That name was wiped out and taken off of the historical website of the Department of Defense because the name of that plane was the Enola Gay. The Enola Gay, one of the most famous pieces of aircraft in history. And because the DEI initiative said you can't use the word gay in the government website,
gone.
They took it off. Now, I'm sure they'll put it back because they say, well, that was a mistake. But it's just part of the cancel culture that is so infuriating. And this is what we have to live with. We have to live with it now. It's just, it's crazy.
Do you find yourself being more of a Bill Maher believer then? do you? I know you don't like Howard. And I understand Howard Stern is not everyone's cup of tea.
Right.
I personally believe Howard Stern was incredible when the FCC was up his rear end. And once he got on the satellite radio, it was too easy for him to get away with stuff.
Yeah.
So he lost a little bit. I personally, I still find him entertaining in bits and pieces, but he was a lot more entertaining when he was on radio.
Yeah.
Right? Because he had to come up with ways to get around it.
Yeah, I'm sure he was.
Do you believe in like all of Bill Maher's rhetoric now? It's just like...
No, I don't believe all of it. I like some of it. I heard he went off on Chapel Roan once, and I said, no, I don't think so. You don't have to go for everybody.
Well, they tried to cancel him.
Yeah.
Because with the whole gender transition thing in kids, it's like he's like, when it comes to children, we're allowed to ask because they are children, right? And, of course, he was always comparing it to all the Hollywood elites that, they gave him something to be able to talk to at their next Sunday dinner. But I there's a lot of things. I love Bill Maher. I think political comedy is very hard to do, and he's done a great job at it. But he brings up a lot of great points, too. But because he did that, they try to cancel him. And I think that was a big mistake to do.
Oh, yeah. No, that's crazy. It's crazy. He should be, he should be allowed to just like, almost any, think back to Richard Pryor. They're coming down to him. Lenny Bruce, my God, going back to think about have we not progressed from the time when Lenny Bruce was being shut down because he was saying stuff that few people found offensive? You know what? There's a lot of things going on right now that I find offensive. And unfortunately, I can't always do anything about it. But I can't cancel. I just turn it off. And I think that's kind of the answer is, we don't want to be influenced, which is another thing. Talk about influencers. That's another story. But I think we have to just be aware. We have to be aware, and if we're conscientious parents, we don't want to censor our kids. We don't want to overprotect them, but we have to make them aware and let them learn to make their own choices and own decisions. And I think that's part of what's a little problematic is that we just sort of breed, a group of kids who just follow in their, whatever their parents believe. And we need to have more free thinkers out there. And when you start playing around with higher education, the way that we're seeing right now, the Department of Education Department of Education plays an important role. And to just say, well, it's not, we shouldn't have it, is just so short-sighted, and it's going to hurt our kids. That's the sort of the cultural, intellectual implications of the political scene right now and scientific and medical is just devastating. And that's why we have the entertainment business, because people need to get away from that.
Right.
That's
Exactly.
That's why I work. That's why I worked at it.
Yeah. I use reality TV shows now just to get out of it. But looking back, last question about the cancel culture. Looking back, do you think there are any shows or anything that you've ever produced that you couldn't do again? You couldn't get away with?
Let's see. There is. I think there were some where I'll give you an example of a show that couldn't be made now. I didn't work on it, but I worked on shows that were similar to it. Was Blazing Saddles. Mel Brooks' Blazing Saddles. He couldn't make that today.
I was about to say Silver Streak.
Yeah, so, Silver Streak. So you couldn't do that. We had some shows early on where there was some language that was used that we couldn't use today. But it's problematic. Today, it's worse now than it was, a few years ago. Right now, I think that there's it's a question of where morality and religion and politics all sort of come together, and who's right or who's wrong. I will say this: there's a lot of there's sort of a resurgence of faith-based programming right now. A friend of mine is an editor on The Chosen. It's become a big hit. We were talking earlier about Girls Gone Bible. There is.
But that's a great tag. That's such a great name.
Yeah, it is.
It's like Ready, Vet, Go.
That's Ready, Vet, Go. Perfect. But the idea of it's always going to be good versus evil, isn't it? You got faith-based versus what are the most popular thing now? Faith-based stuff and horror films. Take your choice.
Yeah. Pick your poison, right?
Yeah. But they should all be allowed to exist. That's the whole point,
Okay, last little bit, because you were into effects and post-production. How has AI changed your job?
Well, my job started changing. Now, for sure, I got out of it a year ago. Like I said, I've been working with AI for probably 3 or 4 years in various forms. The most common way I was working with was really, really interesting and very creative. If we had an actor, in fact, I did have one show where we had an actress who had a little mole on her cheek, and she hated it. She hated that mole, and she would try covering it up with makeup, and it didn't work. We found that if we went in with a classic, what you call basically taking a light pen and erasing it, and covering up, and there's the whole thing about different methods that you can use. It would be expensive and time consuming. With AI, you would expose it to her face. It would take a look at the pixels in that mole. It would decide which ones they could take out and what you could replace it with. And then you could basically run a whole scene of her, and the AI program would go in and basically clean up her face. It removed it. It was remarkable. It was amazing. Well, that morphed into the type of work that they did on The Irishman, where they were able to start making people look younger or older. And those have been around for a few years. What's happened now is it's the good news and bad news. It's taken some jobs away because you don't need the people working on the graphic artists. But it's also opened up a whole world of creativity for different ways to use this. I think ultimately AI, the good that AI can do, will be exploited. I think the concerns about it are the ones everyone is concerned about. Will it take jobs away? Will you be able to create an actor or an actor's voice and not have to hire or pay that actor? Will you be able to have a script written and not actually have to pay a writer to do it? So I think they have to. It's early on, but they really need to deal with these issues. I mean, these are consequential issues, and I think it's going to have a big effect on the industry.
Is AI good enough right now that you could go make an episode of X-Files from start to finish?
No, it's not there. It's not there, and it may never be there. I'm a real advocate that it starts and ends with the human brain, and I don't think that's going to be replaced. I think you'll get substitutes for portions of it, but you're not going to replace it. That's just me. I hope I'm right.
What do you see blowing up in the next 5 years in TV and film?
And what's going to be the big thing?
Yeah.
Well, that's a good question. I think we're going to see less and less of the huge visual effects, shows that have been sort of proliferating between the Lord of the Rings and the Marvel universe, and everyone's trying to outdo each other with visual effects. I think we're going to start to come closer to real life in some ways. That's what I really think is going to happen. I think we've kind of wearing out those kicks of trying to make things bigger and bigger and bigger. I think the industry is finding that it's just expensive to do that. In fact, the mantra recently, when I started getting out, the mantra in the business was spend less money, make fewer projects, hire fewer people. It's kind of this belt tightening we're seeing in the government. Doge is sort of the microcosm of it, but we're seeing that in every industry now. And it's kind of like it's cyclical. We kind of ballooned up, and Netflix started the idea of let's get as many projects as we can made. It's not that they aren't good, not that there's no quality, but the goal wasn't let's make the best shows we can. It was let's make as many shows as we can and get people to turn in, and it became a good formula. What happened was all of the other major production companies tried to chase Netflix. Netflix did it better than they did. You're going to have a few that are going to, the Disney brand will overcome everything. It'll be fine. You got Apple, you got Paramount Plus, you got, Max. Someone's going to drop out somewhere, but they're all deciding that they just can't keep spending the kind of money that they were. When you made a movie and you spend $100 million, great. If you make a TV series over the course of 20 episodes, you spend a few 100 million or more. That's great. That lasts you 20 episodes. The environment now is spend $100 million. You make 6 episodes, and in a week, they've been viewed, and everyone say, okay, what's next? So now you got to spend another $100 million? I mean, it's just not a sustainable formula. So I think that ultimately it's going to start to pull back a little bit. And there's going to be a little bit of change. And some people, it's like musical chairs. I have a lot of friends who aren't working. I don't know if they'll ever get back into it. I think the workforce is being cut, the number of projects being cut. I think the scope is going to be cut a little bit. But at the same time, the technology is improving, and it'll be interesting to see where it goes. I mean, something's going to blow up. To show how unstable it is out there, and how I'm just so not in tune with where the future is going to be. I can't really answer that question. I don't know what's going to blow up next. I can't wait to find out myself.
Behind closed doors, how afraid are ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox of Netflix, Amazon, Apple?
Well, I don't know if they're afraid. I think the business model is changing, though. I think the idea of network television, I don't think it's going to go away, but I think we're starting to see that some of the drivers are sports. Sports, I think, is a huge driver. Some reality shows are picking up. People are always going to want to see a sitcom. There's no reason they shouldn't have a sitcom. Procedurals, cop shows, medical shows. The Pit is a big hit this season. I don't think they're going to go away. I just think it's going to be kind of in a reduced capacity. So I don't know if they're scared. I mean, there was talk, some years ago, are the networks even going to survive? Is everything going to be streaming? I think there's a place for it. I just think the drivers of them are going to change. The profit centers for these corporations is going to change. And, I think the ones that survive, like Disney, which is so multi-tiered, between the parks and entertainment and the experiences, and, I think they're going to be survivors. Amazon, Apple, they're not even real entertainment companies. I mean, that's, Amazon Prime on TV and Apple Plus, that's just kind of funny money for them, So we'll see. We'll see. I think it's very interesting. Some of the companies that are emerging, like A24, which is an independent company and making some of the best features on the scene right now. I think that we're going to kind of see a little reversion back to maybe the smaller suppliers. I don't think the big ones are going to go away. I don't think the networks are going to go away. I think it's just going to be a reduced capacity.
What are your post-retirement plans? I always want to hear this.
Well, it's interesting. I probably should be working for Ready Vet Go, but I'm not. But I will. I'll do something there. Here's what I'm doing. I'm doing some volunteer work, working at a food bank, which is really interesting. And you learn a lot when you work at a food bank. And I had to teach some things to some of the people when I was there, because coming out of the strikes in the entertainment business, there were a lot of people who needed help. So I was working at a food bank, and there were cars would drive in. And if an old beat-up truck came in with a car seat in the back, and you say, okay, it's probably, some working-class company, maybe Hispanic, maybe African-American, whatever, probably needs some help, and yeah, they deserve the food. And then the next car that comes in is a Lexus with a sort of a well-dressed woman behind the wheel. The guy next to me says, how'd she get in line at the food bank here? She must be scamming it. And I said, let me tell you something. Here's the business I just was working in. This woman, let's just make up a story about her. She's a set decorator working on some popular show, Grey's Anatomy. She got laid off and hasn't worked in 18 months. She's not going to sell her car. She's not going to buy a new wardrobe, but she needs help, and we're going to give it to her. So do not judge. And I think what we're finding is that it was kind of like the great equalizer. So I was working with the food bank. I thought that was that made me feel good to do that. But the other thing I'm doing, and I'm almost done with my training on this, I wanted to do something kind of cultural. My background is very much in music and drama. So I joined the volunteer end at the Music Center in Los Angeles, and I am going to be a docent giving tours of the Walt Disney Concert Hall and the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion, the Mark Taper Forum, and the Amundsen Theater. I'm kind of involved in this cultural world, and I'm going to be doing leading tours down there, and it's so much fun. And walking into the Walt Disney, and it's not because I worked at Disney; it's just coincidental. But that building is magnificent, and to be able to walk through that building and hear some of the little stories about it, and I mean, they've got an organ in there which is 6,000 pipes, and they're some huge ones the size of a telephone pole, and there's one the size of a pencil. 6,000 pipes. And when you sit out in the audience and look at it, it looks like a bag of French fries.
It's crazy.
Crazy looking thing.
Yeah.
It's just magnificent. Hearing these stories about and how they tuned it, it's just a wonderful, wonderful place to be. So I'm part of my retirement is getting involved in this cultural arena, and I'm really having fun with it.
Well, I think you've definitely earned. You had your career, not a job. You had your career, and you've seen some amazing things. I'm lucky enough to know your daughter, and she's an absolutely wonderful person. I actually got to meet your grandson on FaceTime.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
good.
And I was very happy to see he was wearing a Led Zeppelin shirt.
Yeah,
and I said, "Are you wearing that because it's cool?" He goes, "No, I love Led Zeppelin."
Yeah, he's into
so that was wonderful as well. But Paul, it was amazing to meet you.
I'm going to tell you one more story.
Oh, go for it.
One last one, because I always say, so what is your legacy? So my legacy could be, yes, I was producing the X-Files, yes, I did CHiPs, all stuff. But there was one event in my life, and if you're an X-Files fan, it will stand out. And it's just something that I think has kind of defined my career here. So we were working on a show. It's called Dwayne Barry, an episode of the X-Files. And I was handling the sound department. We were working on what's called a mixing stage, and we were working remote. In other words, we were piping the sound over to the studio where Chris Carter was in a room over there listening on speakers and watching on television, but he wasn't on the stage with us. And the mixing stage is where we put together the music, the sound effects, and the dialogue, and we temper them and equalize them and make it sound great. And most of the sound effects are recorded and built after the fact. So you can have a whole library of sound effects to make things happen, and particularly on a show like The X-Files, a crazy thing. So this particular episode, there is a device. It's the alien switchblade knife that is used to the bounty hunter would stab people in the pineal nerve, and that's how he killed aliens. And it was this little aluminum tube, and the little blade would pop out, and it was well known throughout. This was the very first episode that alien switchblade knife appeared. We didn't have a sound for it. So we're over in our sound studio in Burbank, and Chris Carter's over at the Fox Library. The Fox studio. And we played what the sound department put together. They had some hydraulic sounds, they had some electronic sounds, and all sorts of things. Metallic scraping. He wasn't happy. He said, "It's got to be really something unique." I said, "This is an alien instrument." Got to be 2 a.m. We did not have that sound. So in exasperation, I put my hand over the mic and I said to the mixer, I said, "Do we have a live microphone here?" He says, "Yeah." I said, "Hook it up." So he hooked up the live microphone. I had him bring it over to me. And here's the conversation. I said to Chris Carter, who's now on the other side of town, I said, Chris, I just had the guys work on a new effect. It took them a little while, but I think they found something that you're going to like. Okay? Hold on, I'm going to have them roll it. So I said, okay, roll that effect. I leaned into the microphone. I went, Pfft. And Chris said, that's good. I said, can we use that one? He said, yeah. Me leaning into the mic, going with the sound of the alien switchblade throughout the run of the X-Files. That's a defining moment.
That's your stamp.
That's my stamp. So I wanted to leave you with that. I'm the guy.
That's all we needed to hear. Well, Paul, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. We're gonna get you definitely back in studio. I know one of my partners wants to sit down and have a little chat with you. But if you have any questions, concerns, just go ahead and hit us on the on the chats. We'll be more than happy. I kind of have an in with him, so I could probably ask a few questions. All you X-File fans, all you Disney fans, anybody out there who has any interest at all in kind of the behind-the-scenes stuff, just let us know, and we'll try to get you some answers. Again, thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next time.